What's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome into another edition of the LA Football Podcast here on the LA Football Network. We are everywhere you get your podcasts. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere your podcasts. We're on YouTube at LAFB Network, and of course, online on our website where you can find all of our articles, all of our shows, and of course, this show, the LA Football Show, on LAFBnetwork.com. I'm your co-host, Ryan Dyrud. I will say joined as always, because now it will be always moving forward, the madman, Jamal Madney. What's up, brother? How we doing?
Doing well, Ryan. Great to see you and excited to kick things off here tonight.
Yes. Thanks for joining me as always. It's great. It's much more fun doing this with a co-host than having to just think of things to talk about for 45 minutes by yourself and have to run with it. So I appreciate you. Happy to be back talking football. We got a lot of fun topics to get to today, as always. But first, we started the new thing. I'm going to put you on the spot. 60-second soapbox. I think it's a fun thing to do every show if possible. Anything, Jamal, you want to talk about for 60 seconds? Could be something funny that happened, a trip you went on, because I know you just traveled again. After just traveling for so long, you're back home finally again. Anything you want to share, you got 60 seconds. Take it away.
Yeah, Ryan, it was a very special weekend. I had the opportunity to travel up north to Stanford to participate in my graduation from business school. I graduated in 2020, the year of COVID, and it was 2 years in the making to finally have an in-person commencement and to see my classmates from all over the world and have this sort of reunion this weekend. It really gave us a great sense of closure in the program, but also gave us a tremendous opportunity to just catch up and, how much we've sort of been a part of each other's lives as classmates and colleagues. So it was a really special weekend and, just speaks to kind of the power of quality relationships that makes a life worth living and really gives life enrichment.
100%. Yeah. And for those keeping track at home, Jamal has a degree from UCLA, a degree from USC, another degree from USC, and a degree from Stanford. So quite the learned man, Jamal. Dr. Madney, I should say.
Appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you.
And for those also keeping track at home, I have a degree from Long Beach State in leisure studies. So little different ends of the spectrum there if we in terms of education, but we both, I feel like, are valued, at least in sports acumen, pretty equally.
No doubt about it. We're kindred spirits. There's book smart and then there's life smart. And Mr. Dairud, you have the life smarts through the roof. There's no doubt about that.
We'll see about that, but appreciate it. All right, so my 60 seconds. What do I feel like sharing? It's been pretty business as usual. Busy, I think. I think just very thankful for everything going on in our lives, and trying to think of a funny story with my daughter, because she always does something funny every day, dude. I mean, she is crazy. My 2-year-old. Anyone out there with a 2-year-old knows what I'm talking about. They are just. It's fun because learn something new every day. It's like insane what kind of sponges they are. Like, Jamal, we're now at the point where, when you have a baby, you kind of can say what you want or watch what you want, just because they're not picking that up yet. Yeah, they're learning things, but they're not like nothing where you have to be afraid of what they're watching or listening to. Now it's like I can't watch like certain movies or anything. So I'm like, okay, she's literally going to repeat everything she hears. She'll try to do, like, we were watching, I think there was like a wrestling commercial on, and all of a sudden she jumps off the couch like a full on, like a wrestling move, jumping in the ring. What are you doing? Are you kidding me? So, yeah, she's just so much fun. Huge hockey fan now. It was hilarious. We were at my buddy's house this weekend. What was it? What's today? Monday. So on Saturday at my buddy's house, and he put on the Rangers Lightning game for the Lightning to win it, to go to the Cup. And it's in the other room. We're not even watching it. And my daughter all of a sudden is like, "Oh, Daddy, hockey's on!" Like she just like recognizes and knows. And so now this football season, I know she's gonna be way into it, because last year she was too young. Now she will know UCLA, USC, the Rams, and Chargers. So not really a 6-second soapbox, but I guess I'll just share that, just how much fun it is having a 2-year-old and being able to nurture and teach them so much. And how, or here's my soapbox moment, how important it is as a parent, and especially as a father, in how you actually nurture your kid and how much responsibility you have. And here's where I'll get to my soapboxy moment is, everything in society is all these different thoughts and opinions on kids and this and nowadays, but in reality, as a parent, you have such a huge obligation to your kid and how you train them, how you teach them, and how you bring them up. And it's been a blast for me to be able to do that. So there's
That's
my
so awesome, Ryan. That's so
3-minute
good.
soapbox. So, all right, Jamal. Well, as always, Bet Online, sponsor the show. BetOnline.ag. Make sure I have those listening. If you have not signed up yet, you're a dummy. What are you doing? Head to betonline.ag. Promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. You're going to get 50% off a welcome bonus. Say it every time. Put $100 in. You get $50 free to play with. Stanley Cup playoffs start on Wednesday. My Avalanche take on the Lightning. You got game 6 now coming up in the NBA playoffs. Warriors lead 3-2. If you want to still put money down on that series, maybe you take a comeback from the Celtics, or you get the Warriors to close it out. And obviously NFL, you got future bets. Take the Chargers to win the Super Bowl. They're I think 5th favorites, or they're top 8. I remember the Rams, I believe, are top 2 favorites.
Yep.
Put money down. Yeah, exactly. We're having the Bucks. So if you want to bet on the futures there, you can bet division winners. You can take parlays on, MVP and all this stuff. So betonline.ag, promo code BELIEVE. Tell them Ryan and Jamal sent you from LAFB. All right, Jamal. So I'll let you break down the rundown. What are we talking about today on the LA Football Podcast?
Well, Ryan, I think, the last couple episodes, obviously, we've shown a lot of love to Rams with the OTAs. We talked a lot about 5-year windows between the Rams and the Chargers and who has a greater outlook in the NFL. And obviously, we've talked a great deal about Jordan Addison coming to USC, the departure of Brandon Sosna from USC. And there's one team out in Westwood that we haven't necessarily given as much time the last couple of episodes. So I think it's fitting that we start with the beloved Bruins of UCLA and
Blues.
Fans an update here about where the Warriors of Westwood are looking like for 2022.
Yeah, we got to talk about the Sissy Blues, right? Did you see that?
Exactly.
Did you see that shirt they actually made after Coach O said that?
Yeah,
gorgeous. I love that. College students just so opportunistic and what they think.
No doubt about it. Coach O, it's channeling the inner Trojan there for
yes.
the Sissy Blues. And that was frankly, it's an ironic karmic twist for Coach O, because the moment he said that, his whole career at LSU sort of spiraled out of control, like right after that moment. Losing to UCLA and LSU never could really get the ship right in 21 and ultimately cost Coach O his job.
We're gonna obviously talk about the future and what this season means for the Bruins and Chip Kelly, but I have to ask you, Jamal. I know we've talked about it, especially when it was going on. You had, I believe, just joined LAFB Network, maybe just prior to that. But can you remember? Obviously, there is, and it was a week 2 game. So week 2 or week 3. So I mean, obviously, it was very early on. But at least in the time that I've certainly covered UCLA, but even like I said, I went to Long Beach State, so we went to UCLA, USC games. So it is like dating back to 2008. I remember following them because UCLA was my dream school. When I lived in Colorado, I wanted to either go to UCLA, Michigan, or University of Colorado. Those are like my 3 schools I wanted to go to. Didn't go to any of them, but it was all good. But I really cannot remember, outside of the USC rivalry, a game that not only meant more as a win, but was just more fun, entertaining, energetic than that LSU game last year. You can disagree with me 100%, but can you think of one in recent memory that really had that much meaning?
Ryan, that game was just so special in terms of early season SEC team, this sort of benchmark type game. Really, outside of a USC game at the Rose Bowl, there's only 2 other games that I can think of in the 21st century, in the last 20 years, that sort of had a similar energy. One was in 2017 when UCLA played Texas A&M in the famous Rosen comeback game from 44-10 late in the third quarter. And Texas A&M, as always, does such an exceptional job of traveling. So there was a tremendous vibe and energy. And then, UCLA comes back with 35 straight in that game.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
The house was on fire. And, Gus
A&M was 5, weren't they?
I'm sorry?
They ranked 5th? Wasn't A&M ranked 5th
at
the time or something?
A&M was the top 10 team, and Gus Johnson was doing the game, and kind of the legend of Josh Rosen was born or solidified or teased, depending on where your perspective lies with Rosen. And the
Yep.
only other game I can think of, Ryan, is 2009. I want to say the home opener against Tennessee, because it was Rick Neuheisel's first game as head coach
Yes.
of UCLA,
That was in the
and
dorms.
on a field goal at the end. It was actually Tennessee missed a field goal that would have forced another overtime, and UCLA won that game, I believe, 27-24 in overtime. It was Neuheisel's first game, and he was very famous for the splash that he had made in his introductory press conference, where he said the football monopoly in Los Angeles is officially over. And he got a lot of heat for that as his career played out at UCLA. But in that moment, after having that press conference and then beating an SEC team as a home opener, it really felt like there was a major turning of the page. So those are the only two games in the last 20 years that I can think of that came close to that LSU game.
Yeah, I believe that was a Kevin Prince-led Bruins team, if
Kevin
I'm not
Prince,
mistaken.
yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yes, yes, one of his only good wins in his tenure, I would say. But yeah, it was just such a special game. I think what made it so special too, Jamal, is just where UCLA had come, right? In the first 3 years of Chip Kelly, and always expecting to get over this hump, and every year they got a little bit better, but very minutely, like one game per year better. And then, to blow the doors off of Hawaii and see Zach Charbonnet with, 3 touchdowns with 9 carries and be like, okay, we got something special here. And they're like, oh, but it was Hawaii. Like, are we really going to do this? And then to do it against LSU and seeing Greg Dulcich burn stuff off and seeing Quentin Lake show up and seeing DTR when it comes clutch, not make the DTR mistakes we were so used to in the years prior, seeing Chip Kelly call a great game, seeing the national media call Chip Kelly a great coach, like talking about after the game, like everyone forgot how great Chip Kelly is. And all of a sudden it's like the rise of Chip Kelly. It was so much fun. And I remember watching that game. I was going to go to the game and I can't remember what happened. I mean, I live literally a mile from the Rose Bowl, and last minute ended up not going. Maybe I couldn't find a sitter or something. So I watching it from my house, I could literally hear like the Rose Bowl. I live so close, like I could hear the roars, but being just so excited, yelling in my. I'm sure my neighbors. We hadn't lived in this place too long yet. This was over a year ago, or almost a year ago, I guess. And I'm sure my neighbors like, what in the heck is going on with this guy? Like I was just going nuts at this game. So it was a blast. Excited for those moments again, hopefully this year.
For sure, Ryan. I mean, what a special game it was. And, you mentioned the great players and, Kyle Phillips burning a Stingley Jr., who was regarded as the best corner in college football. And everyone forgets LSU was 17 months removed from a national championship. And so to really play not only an SEC team, but the SEC team in many ways outside of Alabama, of really the benchmark of the sport, and to be able to win that game in the fashion that they did and see those baby blues running around, it really was a very special night.
Yeah, it was great. So, all right, well, let's shift to this year now. And, after that game obviously set the benchmark for the season. And unfortunately, the week after that, they had the disappointing loss to Fresno State that I was at in the press box in the just shocking last drive moments. But, they rebounded and still had a very successful campaign. So this year, we've talked about it before, but, starting off a very favorable schedule in the beginning with 3 home games against, not even really D1 talent, if you will. And then having a very favorable conference schedule. I mean, I believe they have 9 home games to 4 away or something like that, which I didn't even know was like allowed or possible. So the Rose Bowl is getting a lot of love this year. I mean, what are your just initial, based on the schedule, based on who's returning, based on, DTR's 5th year going out trying to break records as a UCLA quarterback, but also get over the hump. What's your expectation for this team, and what would be considered successful, and what would be considered a major letdown?
Ryan, I mean, when you look at the schedule, and you alluded to this, there's a couple things that jump out. One is 3 non-Power 5 teams in terms of the non-conference at home.
Yep.
The other thing that really jumps out, only 4 true road games the entire season. And when you sort of break down the schedule, the non-conference is going to be 3-0. And when you look at their conference schedule, 6 of the 9 teams that UCLA plays had a combined record last year of 17-47. And so even if you say, okay, there's going to be improvement with those teams, as is the case in college football every year, to go from 30 games under 500, even if you improve, you're still really in a position there where UCLA has 9 games that not only should they win, I think it would be a massive disappointment if they went anything less than 9-3. And that really just leaves the 3 big games on the schedule at Oregon, home for Utah, home for SC. And to me, I think that there's really an opportunity to win one of those games at least, get to 10-2, get to 7-2 in the conference. And I really believe now with the conference realignment that has taken place, where effectively we've removed divisions for the purposes of the Pac-12 championship game, but we still have a divisional concept for the purpose of scheduling, that a winner of USC UCLA this year, I believe, will play Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. And so anything less than 9 to 10 wins and playing for a spot in the Pac-12 championship game that last week of the season, anything less than that is going to be a massive disappointment this year when you consider the fact that DTR is coming back for year 5, and Zach Charbonnet, who I believe outside of Breece Hall would have been the top running back taken in this year's NFL draft, decided to forego that opportunity, considering what the shelf life of a running back is, to come and to win and to partner with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. You're talking about 2 of the best 5 players offensively in the conference. Experience, explosiveness. This is now year 5 of Chip, a very favorable schedule. This is the time for UCLA to declare to USC, to the rest of the Pac-12, we're here too. And this is definitely going to be a 2-horse race in the city moving forward.
Yeah, and I think they definitely, especially with how good Chip has been in the transfer portal, that he can sustain this long term. But that being said, this is, I think, their best, maybe not best, I think they will be, but this is their easiest opportunity, which easy is a very lightly used word, but because with USC being the first year of Lincoln Riley, there's going to be vast improvement there. But a Lincoln Riley USC team this year is not going to be as good as a Lincoln Riley team 2 years from now or in 2 years. So this year is a huge opportunity for UCLA to really seize that moment. And then if they do that, I mean, kids know if UCLA goes out and wins 10, 11 games, that just helps your recruiting that much more. And they say, all right, well, I'd rather play spoiler and go to UCLA and be able to beat USC, or be the guy that goes to UCLA and keeps them on this run against the vaunted USC that is back now and whatnot. So I think this year is so important to they need to solidify that this year, and they need to be the team in the Pac-12 South. And like you said, that doesn't necessarily matter for the championship game, but it certainly matters still for bragging rights and matters for the schedule in which they play. But in order to do it this year, it'll set themselves up to continue that success. Because if they go out and they win 7 games this year, I mean, A, that might be a short-lived contract for Chip Kelly, but B, it's going to be very hard to build off of that based on what USC is going to be able to do moving forward. So super important this year for them to get, I think, 10, 11 wins with the schedule, with how the schedule is. They play, I think it's 9. I think they play 13 games, if I'm not mistaken. There is no reason they can't go 11
in the regular season. Yeah, and it's going to be 8 at home, 4 on the road, and it just, they got to get to double digits. There's no question. And Ryan, you said a couple of really important things. One is, you're absolutely right. The juggernaut that is coming at USC, you can feel it from now, right? And there's going to be a huge jump between what USC was for the last few years and what they will be this year. And we've talked about on previous shows, hey, they have the ability, even with the defense, what it is schematically, personnel-wise, I think they're a little underrated, truthfully, defensively, but schematically, they can still have the potential to outscore their way to a conference championship, but that's only going to get further strengthened year after year. And if UCLA doesn't show the resistance this year, you're starting to look at a Pete Carroll-like tenure and run and unproportioned balance between kind of USC football and UCLA football. And there's a couple things here, Ryan. One is things change very quickly in terms of the balance of power. I think a lot of folks are too young to realize this, but at the end of the 2001 season, late October 2001, UCLA was the top dog in football in LA over the last decade.
8 years straight, right?
At the end of October 2001, UCLA was 6-0 and ranked number 3 in the inaugural BCS ranking at the end of October in 2001. USC under Pete Carroll, year 1, was 2-5 at that point. And UCLA had beaten SC 8 years in a row through the 90s. And in 4 weeks, UCLA went from 6-0 to 6-4. They lost 4 games in a row. And SC went from 2-5 to 6-5. They won 4 games in a row, and it culminated in SC beating UCLA 27-0 in Carroll's first victory bell game. And that victory propelled SC to get the recruiting dominance over UCLA to set the run up. And essentially 4 weeks redefined the next decade. And that's how quickly things can change in this sport. And history has the potential to repeat itself this year if UCLA doesn't step up to the plate and really put together a massive season. Because the other piece, Ryan, is you have to be good every 5 years. If you sort of lose it over a 5-year window, it is very hard to get it back. And the reason for that is the recruits that you are communicating with, that you're trying to relate to, that you're trying to convince to come to your school, 5 years ago, they were in 8th grade. They don't remember anything beyond 5 years. And so that's one of the reasons why the Lincoln Riley hire at USC was so significant, because this is sort of year 5 after 4 consecutive years of mediocrity. USC football has been 22-21 over the last 4 years. USC was flirting with absolute disaster if they had another terrible year this year, where they would be totally irrelevant because kids would be too young or have not even been born at the time of the Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush type years. And so, A, things can change very quickly, and B, you have to be relevant within a 5-year window. And for all of those reasons, UCLA, it is a must double-digit win season for UCLA, and I believe they can do it.
How important, and I agree with everything you said, how important do you think this year, obviously it's important every year, but this year for UCLA is beating USC? Now, let's say they, when it's said and done, they have 10 wins regardless. If they lose SC, they still have 10 wins. If they win, they maybe have 11. Or let's say their only loss is SC. Let's say they beat Utah, they beat Oregon, and their only loss is SC. And obviously that still sets them up for not only a great bowl game, that could actually set them up still for a Pac-12 championship game. But how important, in your opinion, is beating SC? And the other thing I'm going to follow up with that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this. People forget 2 years in a row, Oklahoma came to the Rose Bowl. Lincoln Riley led Oklahoma, Alex Grinch as the defensive coordinator, and pounded the UCLA Bruins in back-to-back years. 50-plus points both times. Oklahoma packing the Rose Bowl. And now that same coaching staff is in LA, is in South Central on USC. So they essentially have UCLA's number, even though UCLA put up 60 last year at the Coliseum. So, A, like I said, how important is UCLA beating USC to their season overall? And B, why is that not getting talked about more? I know it's SC UCLA, but Lincoln Riley's been dominating this Chip Kelly Bruins team back to when he was at Oklahoma.
Ryan, it's a great point. I'll tell you, it's so paramount, I think, that for UCLA to beat SC, because there's something that hasn't been really talked about. And as much as we think of college football and USC, the last 10 years, the USC-UCLA series has been 5-5.
Yeah.
And so the winner of this game actually will have won the rivalry over an 11-year period. And so for UCLA to be able to go into a recruit's house and say, you know what, SC has all the hype and they have all of the Lincoln Riley cachet and whatnot, but we're the team that's beaten them more over the last 11 years head to head. So come to the place where we know how to beat this team and where you're going to grow and develop. And I think the other piece of why it's so important, Ryan, is I think it holds a lot of significance when the game is at the Rose Bowl. And I think this year, the game's at the Rose Bowl, and SC, even in their heydays, I mean, even in the Leinart Bush years, playing at the Rose Bowl was a little bit of a struggle. Even in the 2010s, SC has struggled in the Rose Bowl when UCLA has had their starting quarterback. I think it's really important for Chip to get that leg up on Lincoln Riley in the head-to-head, because Lincoln Riley has gotten so much media attention. He's sort of the darling of West Coast football right now. And for Chip to be able to walk in there and say, look, those Oklahoma teams were seasoned teams. Those were Bob Stoops recruiting classes. Those were cultivated and gift wrapped for Lincoln Riley. And I was building UCLA brick by brick from the ground up because the cupboard was absolutely bare after the Jim Mora era. So yeah, he tattooed me for $50, but that wasn't even really fair. But when he had Caleb Williams and I had Dorian Thompson-Robinson and he had Jordan Addison and I had Zach Charbonnet, when the talent discrepancy was minimal and it was sort of an equal, fair competition, I took care of Lincoln. And I think the ability to be able to command that to recruits' parents, to sponsors, to boosters, I think it's absolutely paramount. And I think if UCLA can beat SC on the way to a Pac-12 South championship, I think it's really game on in terms of the rivalry, where I know you've had this vision. I've had this vision. Others within LAFB have had this vision about USC, UCLA being this rivalry that Ohio State, Michigan is, Auburn, Alabama is, and really be that equivalent to the West Coast. And I think we have all of the ingredients for that to happen.
There's no reason not. And at that point in the season, both teams will have played Utah. I don't think USC plays Oregon this year, but UCLA will have already played Oregon because UCLA ends the season with Cal, USC ends the season with Notre Dame. So all the conference schedule will be over. If we can get to that matchup with both teams undefeated, this town is going to go nuts. And it's going to be beautiful for this network, beautiful for this show, but beautiful for LA and for this rivalry and for the growing hype around Chip Kelly and Lincoln Riley, because those are two very fun coaches in a rivalry that we haven't, I mean, we haven't had that since, the Pete Carroll days. And even the Pete Carroll days, there wasn't like the UCLA equivalent, if you will. And I'm not saying like definitely Chip Kelly doesn't have the charisma of Lincoln Riley, but he is a established, well-known, famous college coach. And so being able to have that Lincoln Riley and Chip Kelly rivalry, and this year specifically, which is a great transition, Jamal, DTR versus Caleb Williams, so much fun. DTR in his 5th year, Caleb Williams, a true sophomore who has a ton of hype, but is still a sophomore. Who do you like in this matchup? Not necessarily just head to head, but just overall in this season going into 2022. When you look at DTR and all that he's accomplished, I think he doesn't get enough love. I think he had a phenomenal season last year, like cut turnovers down exponentially. The yards were up, the rushing yards were up, the touchdowns were up. The leadership was more prevalent and more powerful that we saw. His teammates love him. His coaches love him. He's a leader in the classroom, a leader off the football field. But Caleb Williams is the SC protege of a quarterback. I've seen him in practice. He's big. He's good looking. He's charismatic. He talks to the media in a way that we saw Matt Leinart talk, Carson Palmer talk, where he just knows how to speak and talk to the media. And he is Troy. Who do you like in this season between these two quarterbacks?
Ryan, it's really interesting. And before I answer that, I want to double click back to something you said about the coaches, and then it'll be all DTR and Caleb. I don't think we've ever had marquee matchup in the history of SC-UCLA.
Yeah.
Ever. In terms of
it's been one or the other.
It's always been one or the other. If you go back to the 1950s, it was Red Sanders at UCLA, and he had built a power. UCLA won the national championship in 1954. He tragically died very suddenly. And then that gave the rise to the John McKay era, the great John McKay from 1960 to 1978. UCLA really didn't have anyone who was sort of equivalent to John McKay in that level. And then once John McKay retired, then it was the Terry Donahue years at UCLA of the 80s and the early 90s that led into Bob Toledo. And then it was all Pete Carroll through the 2000s. And then in the 2010s, Jim Mora sort of revived UCLA, and there was a lot of dysfunction between kind of Kiffin and Sark and Coach O and where it eventually went to. So if you look at the last 70 years of SC UCLA, you've never really had that Phil Jackson, Pat Riley at the same time type of situation. And that's why I think this Chip Kelly, Lincoln Riley dynamic is so delicious. It's so unprecedented, and it can really be that hidden recipe as to why this rivalry goes to the next level. So I really believe we're at a very unprecedented time in a very exciting way about this rivalry. Now, shifting gears.
And last thing, Jamal, before you jump to the quarterbacks, both coaches, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to think all the way back, have played in the college football playoff. Wasn't Chip Kelly in that first year with Oregon before we sprung to the NFL? He was with Marcus Mariota, and obviously Lincoln Riley has been there before as well.
Chip, so the Marcus Mariota team actually was led by Helfrich. But I mean, it was all of Chip's guys. But Chip played in the national championship game pre-CFP, but in the BCS when it was against Auburn and Kent. So Chip was 3 points away from winning the national championship. And then, of course, Lincoln Riley has had 4 CFP appearances, yet to get a CFP win, mind you. But, the 4 CFP appearances. So these are very, very marquee names. And I don't think we've really, you could argue a little bit in the mid-90s when John Robinson came back against Donahue, but Robinson was clearly not the same guy then that he was when he was McKay's assistant in the late 70s. And so we've really never had it. And it's going to be just so exciting and so delicious that I think, it's just such a preeminent time for LAFB. And now I think, talking quarterbacks, Ryan, and you set it up so beautifully. The DTR Caleb, it's 5 years versus 5 stars, right? It's the guy who is, to your point, the decorated 5-star guy, all the talents, the deep ball, the finesse, the athleticism, the astuteness of the media and the cultivation, versus the guy who played quarterback 1 year at Bishop Gorman, has had to really learn the position at the collegiate level, and really has had to take these jumps both on the field and resulting sort of leadership and maturity off of it. And DTR in many ways has been a self-made superstar, a blue-collar superstar, if you will. I think he was absolutely spectacular last year because I think his usage rate was lower than it was in years past, Ryan. It was a product of having more around him and Chip being able to do more things around him. The first couple of years with DTR under center, he had to just do way too much. And the game broke down into sort of a sandlot pickup type of game too frequently. Here, last year, the offense was simplified for DTR. It was, read 1, read 2, and then go run. And so, the game slowed down for DTR. He was really good outside of the pocket. He really wanted to be a thrower, but then his athleticism took over when it needed to. He really helped elevate the Kyle Phillips conversation of being one of the sleepers in the NFL draft. Dulcich was his guy in key situations. He even had a really nice connection with Cam Brown earlier in the season and had a fabulous connection with Kaz Allen late in the season. And so he really started kind of peppering that ball all over at the end of the season, which is really a great sign of maturation and talent when you don't have to lock into one guy. I'm expecting big things from DTR this year. I think we're going to hear a lot about DTR, especially in September and early October, as an early sort of Heisman type of candidate, because I think there's an opportunity to really puff up the numbers the first couple of weeks. We're just not playing elite competition. And I think he can jump out of the gates with a 15 touchdown, 2 interception type of September and really sort of take that momentum into conference play in October. With a lot of sort of confidence and a lot of clarity in terms of what he needs to do moving forward. I think that Caleb has all of the skills and all of the talents. And I think physically, Caleb is probably more gifted a thrower and probably more gifted a body to be able to take hits and be more durable. But I really like DTR's chances of being Pac-12 Player of the Year this year, and he's my betting favorite to do so.
Yeah, it's fun to watch it all culminate now down to this season. And I think he, has so much talent and like I said, such a just gifted leader now that he's become and just beloved by his teammates. I mean, you guys on Draft is in Session and Bruin Bible had multiple Bruins on that. Not that no one's going to say anything bad about their quarterback, but it was like you could tell guys were like glowing about him, and it wasn't like a forced answer. Like, yeah, he was a good guy, he was a good leader. Like, it's like they genuinely love, and Charbonnet too. I mean, genuinely love Charbonnet, who's a whole different animal and a different story we could talk about, but. It's going to be
The one
really
thing
fun.
there, just to piggyback, if I may, the leadership piece is often, used a lot, and it's used very loosely. In this particular case, it matters a great deal. And here's an example why. Zach Charbonnet decided to come back.
Mhm.
You're not going to come back as a running back. As a running back who blew up last year, who was dominant in his last game, 167 yards against SC. They didn't play the bowl game.
Yep.
He had about as great an exit. His stock was as high as it could be at the collegiate level, short of winning the Doak Walker. And he decided to forego that, knowing the running back position at the NFL is becoming more commoditized. The shelf life is shorter. They take a beating. You have to sort of maximize and grab the bag as much as you can as a running back for as long as you can. He forego all of that to come back to share the backfield with DTR because of what they felt was unfinished business and trying to win a conference championship for UCLA and put UCLA football back on the map. That decision does not happen if you, A, don't believe in your quarterback, and B, you don't have a deep appreciation for what your quarterback is trying to do and who you are sharing the backfield trenches with. And that is maybe DTR's greatest accomplishment, is for all of the on the field stuff and the 67-63 win against Washington State and the 62 he hung against SC in the Coliseum. That could very well be his greatest accomplishment, is based on who he is as a person, as a player, on the field, off the field, that a superstar like Charbonnet, absolute flat out superstar, decided to come back, give up those millions of dollars potentially to share the backfield with him to try and put UCLA on the map. That speaks volumes.
Yeah, well said. 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of fans probably don't recognize that or realize that and how important that is and what that says about, him as a person, what that says about the UCLA program and the fact that these guys are giving up million. And I know there's NIL now, but giving up the opportunity of guaranteed money in the NFL to come back and play with your brothers and hopefully do something that UCLA football has not done for a very long time. And they have a huge opportunity to do that this year with this team built. The last thing I'll ask you about this team, and then we're going to transition a little bit to USC because we want to talk about a topic with them. But with all the departures, with, I mean, they were what, top 6 in schools and draft picks with how many guys got drafted. And, you lose both tackles and Alec Anderson and Sean Ryan. You lose Kyle Phillips and Greg Dulcich, your two kind of star playmakers. You also lose, I'm trying to blank his name, other receiver transferred, Chase Cota. Cota transferred. You lose Quentin Lake. You lose Tito Abonia. You lose others on the defensive line. You have another transfer from the defensive line. They've had a lot of transfers in. The big guys are there with Charbonnet and DTR, like we've been talking about. Is there concern for you at all with these departures? Do you think they've done enough with the guys coming back and with the transfer portal to where they are, in your opinion, maybe not the favorite in the Pac-12 South because of SC's done and because Utah's Utah, but at least a equal, if you will?
Ryan, they're absolutely a co-favorite to win the Pac-12 with USC and with Utah. And here's why. You got, for all of the losses that you talked about, they got the Murphy twins. They got Azizi Hearn. They got Jordan Davies on the defensive side. On the offensive side, they got Jake Bobo. They shored up things on the offensive line. I think the only question I have for UCLA moving forward is, are they going to be able to fill out the Alec Anderson, Sean Ryan duo? That's really the only question. They've got talent. They've brought guys in. They've got really good transfers. Defensively, I could argue that they are as talented, if not more talented, and they're probably going to be a more disciplined defense with what I have seen and what I feel is going to be the case. So I think defensively, I don't think UCLA is ever going to be a dominant defensive team, but I think they're going to be good enough and better than they were last year. I think the only question is slightly on the offensive line, but I think they're going to tighten that up. I think it's very reasonable to have UCLA as a co-favorite in the Pac-12 with SC and Utah.
Yeah, well, I think, there wasn't a lot of excitement with the new defensive coordinator hire, but regardless, with the Azanera resignation, they're going to be better on defense.
Absolutely.
And then you bring in Ken Norton.
Exactly. I mean, and Ken Norton Jr. has shown that he is a recruiting machine. He's showing the charisma. He's actually using a lot of his USC experiences and Seattle Seahawks experiences to really relate with the modern college football recruit. And I think Bill McGovern is someone who is very, sort of similar to Jerry Ozanero in a lot of ways. But he has demonstrated two things that Ozanero has not, even at this particular point. One is a willingness to engage with the media and be very transparent with his players. And that's something that was a knock on Ozanero. And number two, McGovern has demonstrated an ability to be very open-minded in terms of flexibility within his scheme. And so there's a lot of talk about whether this is going to remain a 4-2-5 defense, or are they going to do some sort of hybrid combination 3-4? But McGovern is really experimenting. And I think that's something that Ozanero seemed to be rather stubborn in his approach and unwilling to sort of bend. And I think McGovern has shown an ability to be open-minded and also be very transparent. And those are two very, very positive things relative to the Ozanero era. So even though McGovern might not be the sexy hire, I think he is a significant improvement over Ozanero, and B, I think in many ways he can be that perfect succession plan bridge to potentially even have Ken Norton be the eventual defensive coordinator moving forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a perfect. I'll ask you one last question on that because then we're going to segue into the USC defense. We're kind of just, this isn't even planned. It's just like naturally our vibe and chemistry, how we just are going down these paths, Jamal. But you mentioned two things there that I want to ask you about. And one, I mean, this isn't a question, but I think a lot of people, when they saw the McGovern hire, there was just this, because he was Chip Kelly's defensive coordinator at Philadelphia. So it's like, okay, he leaves one friend and goes to another friend and this and that. But everything you said is true. Like, it seems like there's much more of a collaboration there. There's much more of a willingness to adapt, much more of a willingness to see, okay, what talent do I have? Do we adjust here, this here, instead of like, this is the system, do it or fail. And unfortunately with Ozanero, it just failed a lot of the time. But the question I have for you, and this is just more of not necessarily me, but I think a lot of fans think this, is McGovern's hired and it's like, okay, like, not the sexy hire, but at least it's not Ozanero. But then a few weeks later, all of a sudden, Ken Norton Jr. comes on board. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why wasn't he just hired as a defensive coordinator? Like, why is he coming in as the linebacker coach? And why aren't we just promoting him to DC and either moving McGovern or this? So just curious, your thoughts. Is it one of those where maybe they didn't think they could get Ken Norton to come? Because I know SC was maybe lurking around those things as well. And then when he became available, it was like, oh, great. What capacity you have? Or do they have a succession plan where it's like, all right, well, maybe he didn't want to be as the head face and wanted to be more on the recruiting side and positional wise, and then take over later on? Just your opinion on that. Cause I know a lot of fans are like, why isn't Ken Norton just the DC?
Yeah, Ryan, I think that my personal opinion is that this was absolutely the right thing to do. I think that coming in and having Ken Norton Jr. just be the defensive coordinator actually shortchanges a couple of things. One is, what has always been the knock on Chip is that his inability to be charismatic and to recruit straight out of high school, right? Let's take the transfer portal aside, where he's been exceptional. Mm-hmm. But the straight, 4-year high school kid that's going to come straight to college, that has always been his struggle. So let's get a dynamic, charismatic, former NFL great. Ken Norton Jr. is the only player in the history of football to win 3 straight Super Bowls. And, he was on the Legion of Boom coaching staff. He was on the great Leinart and Bush years. I mean, his stories, his relatability is second to none. And so he fills a need and a deficiency that Chip had. So that's checkbox one. But B is, and this is where I think a lot gets lost, UCLA didn't have a schematic problem last year defensively. UCLA had a discipline and a gap integrity problem defensively. When you watch those games and you see what happened against Arizona State, and you see what happened against Fresno State, and you see what happened against Oregon, the three of those four losses, the secondary was absolutely atrocious in terms of gap integrity, staying disciplined within their lanes, and limiting the big plays. And so that is really on individual play, trying to kind of make the home run. And I think if you can bring in a McGovern to say, okay, look, actually schematically, we're not that far off now with the Azizi Hearns and the Jordan Davies. And if we can just play sound situational football, if we can just be a mid-40s to mid-50s defense, we are going. If UCLA was the 50th ranked defense last year, they would be 11-1 and 8-1 in the Pac-12 and playing in a New Year's Six game. And so, you don't actually sometimes need the sexy hire. You need to sort of understand how close or how far away you are. And UCLA defensively is actually a lot closer than people realize. And so I commend them for not over-rotating and over-indexing and over-panicking on what they were and were not on that side of the ball. And I think it was a very calm, strategic hire to get McGovern, to get that defense to where it needed to be. But then it also tightened up the recruiting prowess to get Ken Norton Jr. And I think they killed both birds, not with the same stone, with two different stones, but I think they checked both those boxes.
That's such an interesting point, because I don't think a lot of people would see that they're closer than appears to the eye, and that. So it's such a great description you give there, and I agree, especially when you break it down that way, that it just takes more discipline and gap and being more prevalent, and that comes down to coaching, obviously, in practice and week in preparation and stuff like that. But it wasn't just the scheme was just such a faulty, leaky scheme. It was just in being gap scan and whatnot. So I love the direction they're going. I love to see where this defense goes. I love that they have the schedule they have to start off. The Pac-12, for whatever reason, and I commend this on this, but they always try to schedule very difficult out-of-conference games, and I commend them for that. But unfortunately, they get blasted by the media, by the committees, and all this because of that, whereas the SEC and the Big Ten will make these cupcake out-of-conference schedules where their quarterbacks become Heisman favorites right off the bat because they have 20 touchdowns against Chattanooga State and whatnot. And over here, UCLA is playing Oklahoma and USC is playing Alabama and all these different things. And obviously those schools are playing us as well. So I understand that, but it's nice to finally be like, okay, let's just get the season started off right, build up some momentum, and then see where it goes. Absolutely. So, but Jamal, that'll be a good transition now into, and we're going to wrap up with a little Rams Chargers talk as well, because we got some stuff we want to talk about them. But I want to spend some time on Alex Grinch and the USC defense, because we just talked about UCLA's defense, and moving on from Azzinaro, hiring McGovern. There wasn't a lot of love for that. You broke it down beautifully, that you think it actually is going to work out for the better, and bringing in Ken Norton Jr. obviously is a huge part of that, and his recruiting prowess obviously aids in that. But you look at USC now, and going back to Oklahoma, definitely their strong suit has never been their defense. And we don't need to get into X's and O's right now. We have the Salute to Troy podcast with Alfred Rowe and Phil Robinson, who do a great job. And they're going to be breaking down a lot of Oklahoma film here coming up for USC fans listening. Make sure to tune into that. But one thing I want to ask you, Jamal, and you can get into some of the schematic stuff if you want to, but one thing I really want to ask you is, what is it about, and you won't have an answer to this, but just we can debate it. Why is it that these collegiate coaches, specifically now talking about Lincoln Riley, who's this elite coach, and he has to know the biggest downfall of Oklahoma and why they didn't win a college football playoff game the 4 times they went was due to the defense not being able to stop anyone. And yet, once he gets a new opportunity, didn't even have to fire his guys. It wasn't had to feel bad about firing his buddy at Oklahoma, but had the opportunity to bring someone new in and says, nope, I'm going to bring the same guy over who I know has been our Achilles heel for all my years coaching. Why is it that that's the norm? And we've seen Chip Kelly do it. You've seen so many coaches that like they have their staff and they can never win, but they are going to stick to that staff. Why is that?
Ryan, it's so interesting, isn't it? And it doesn't make a lot of sense. Here's my theory. Lincoln Riley is an offensive guy. His expertise is on the offensive side of the ball. Chip Kelly, same thing. And I think for them, they want the known commodity for all of his deficiencies, because then they can, in their minds, design an offensive scheme and an offensive strategy around what they know they're going to get on the other side of the ball. It actually makes them, I think, in their minds, a better play caller and a better orchestrator of the offensive side of the ball when you know exactly what you have. You know, there's that saying, the known devil is better than the unknown devil. And I think a lot of these guys are creatures of habit. The other example, Ryan, is Saban, right? What made Saban go from a guy who won a couple of national championships in a particular era to being the GOAT coach in college football? Look at who his offensive coordinators were those first couple of Alabama title runs. It was the Jim McElwains and all of these SEC guys that he had. And the moment the spread concepts were starting to get into the SEC, everyone forgets 2013, 2014, Alabama lost. They were not where they needed to be. And it was only until Saban said, look, I got to go outside my comfort zone and outside of the guys that I know and go get a Lane Kiffin and go get a Sark and really start adopting modern college football. Otherwise, my run's going to be over. That's what enabled him to win the next 3 national championships. And so these guys by nature, and why was that even a friction to begin with? Because Saban was a defensive guy. And he was like, well, as long as I know what I'm getting offensively, I can be an even better expert of my side of the ball. So I think that's how these guys think, is because they still have one side of the ball that they're really good at, and that's who they are. And I think they just want kind of the known commodity to be able to work around, where if they get someone who potentially is a better hire, but there's more volatility, it could actually impact them on their side of the ball. As weird and as illogical as that sounds, I think that's how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, I get that. Totally. That's a great way to break it down. It just always, that line of thinking concerns me because we haven't really seen that work ever, right? Like I think even to the pro level, and you look at the Broncos of the year past with Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio, one of the best defensive minds in all of professional sports, let alone football. And, he had his very first year as a coach, had a new hire as his OC and Rich Scangarella, who was a Kyle Shanahan disciple and kind of never been an OC before and kind of volatile and new. And the offense took some time to get going, but it seemed like it was really kind of starting to get its form late in the year. Well, at the end of the year, out of nowhere, unbeknownst to anyone, he ends up firing Scangarello, brings in Pat Shurmur, who is, an old school OC, but he's been a head coach before. Vic Fangio has had coach with him before, knew what he was getting, knew, okay, he's going to run the offense. I don't got to worry about him at all. I'll run my defense so I can focus fully on the defense. Well, now they're all fired because it never worked out, and the Broncos' offense was pitiful and their defense was good. But hey, defense, unfortunately, you need the offense to go in order to sell tickets and make the fans happy. So it concerns me when coaches think like that, and I hope it works out for SC. I really think the offense is going to be so good it won't matter in the Pac-12. I really believe that. I think this offense can absolutely put up 40 on anybody with the talent they have. And if Grinch, maybe not the best DC, but I think he can hold teams to 30. So I think he can do that much. I mean, we saw the Rose Bowl last year, and I know Utah had injuries in the secondary, but that Rose Bowl was 48-45, Ohio State versus Utah, and Utah's a defensive team.
Have their top 2 receivers.
So. Yeah, exactly. So I think we're in an era in college football where you'll be okay. But that line of thinking is something that always is interesting to me. And, we run a business here, and that's not how I would run a business. So I can't imagine running a football team like that.
Absolutely not. And I think, that's sort of their line of thinking, but it's also the thing that's cost both Lincoln and Chip in the ultimate games, because, Chip's inability to sort of think physically, right, even in his heyday at Oregon, ultimately sort of cost him whenever Oregon would play Stanford in those physical offensive lines. And, they would just pummel Oregon, ratchet down the tempo, chew the clock, turn the game into a standstill and just, outmuscle those Oregon teams. And even with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, Dave Aranda had his number as a defensive guy. And, we're talking about they're going to be able to outscore their way through. I think eventually the one Achilles heel for SC is going to be Oregon with Lanning. As a defensive SEC guy, Lincoln has still yet to prove that he can sort of outmaneuver those guys, and in these big CFP type games, where he's run into the Alabamas and the LSUs and the Ohio States of the world, Oklahoma, with the exception of that Georgia game, right? That semifinal 54-48 classic. Baker and all of that. And they got lit up in that game too. But that was the only one of his 4 CFP games that was even close. The other 3, I mean, he just got tattooed. And Aranda also has always had his number. So, there's a reason both those guys, very successful, great coaches. It's going to make for great theater in the rivalry. But there's a reason both those guys are still ringless.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And you brought up Oregon, and we'll move on here and finish up with the Rams and Chargers. But I was gonna bring that up, actually. I'm glad you said it with Lanning as the hire. Like, to me, that hire felt like a counter to USC.
Yep.
And that's nothing against Lanning, but it felt like it was like, okay, we know the future of Pac-12 is USC now with Lincoln Riley here. We know that Utah, as good as they are, as great of a coach as Whittingham is, they had this decade window and still they were unable to really have tremendous success. They were very good, very competent, great coach, but with the dumpster fire that USC was, with UCLA having so many down years, with ASU having all their issues, Utah really was a 500 bowl team essentially when it comes to Rose Bowls and whatnot. And so Oregon, I feel like they knew USC is now rising to the top again. How do we counter that? And they go after an SEC defensive coach that has had success against Lincoln Riley. So it's going to be a really fun chess match to watch those two programs, how they build and how they counter. And we'll see how Alex Grinch counters. You hope maybe fresh place, new recruits. I know Oklahoma is one of the blue bloods of college football. I'm not saying anything about Oklahoma. It's one of the great college football programs. It's just my opinion that USC can recruit better because it's the Southern California. People would much rather live in it, especially in today's day and age with NIL, with what college athletes are able to do. Kids nowadays would much rather live in Los Angeles than normal Oklahoma. It's no disrespect to Oklahoma, but I think it's very different now than it was in the Big 8 days of the Oklahoma-Nebraska rivalry and stuff like that. It's very different now. Kids want to live in LA. They want to be on TikTok. They want to be doing all this stuff. I think Alex Grinch will have more success in their recruiting cycle here, but we'll see if it translates that. Because I thought the same thing about Todd Orlando when he came from Texas, and after one season, USC defense was a dumpster fire again. So, and it was just, that was now after he had been here a year, it had become just systemic at that point, unfortunately. So,
Ryan, is that, there's sort of an adage that, you need talent to be a great coach. And that's absolutely true. You're not going to win national championships with 2 stars and 3 stars. Yep. You're going to need the 4 and the 5 stars. But this notion that, hey, I couldn't win with 10 4 stars and 5 5 stars, and now I have 10 5 stars and 5 4 stars, so I'm going to win. I think that's nonsense. Like, 100%. There's a certain level of talent. There's sort of a minimum threshold of talent you need to be successful. And then beyond that, I think it's very marginal in terms of the return, and it's a law of diminishing returns, and then coaching actually matters. So I actually don't think Grinch is a very good coach, and I don't think Grinch is going to be a very good coach at USC. The question is going to be, can USC, A, overcome his deficiencies, and B, is Lincoln going to be around long enough to then hire another guy that is going to be competent and really set up USC for success?
Yeah. Last question. And to your point real quick, I've talked to, Scott Schrader, who does a phenomenal work in recruiting for USC. He was USC Scoop. I think he's on 3 now. And I talked to him specifically. I'm like, what is the difference between a high-end 4-star and a 5-star? And he said, it's nothing. It's like the media gives him stars. Like a high-end 4-star is essentially just as talented as 5-star. But we as like media and fans, like, oh, they have 5-5-stars and 10 4-stars. Rally, they have 15 of the same players. So let's just get that out of the way. If you have that many 4-stars, you have plenty of talent to win with. The last question for you, Jamal, and then let's jump quickly to this Rams Chargers talk. So you talked about with UCLA, with bringing in McGovern, that the scheme wasn't that far off. It was more about discipline. Do you think the same can be said about Alex Grinch's scheme? Do you think the scheme is not far off? It's potentially just whether it's the talent, whether it's situationally, whether it's discipline. I don't want to test you too much because I'm sure you don't watch a ton of Oklahoma football, but just from what you have seen, obviously you know what you're talking about. Do you think it's something that can be, well, maybe it's not that far off and maybe it can be a lot better SC, or is it, we know what it is, it's going to be giving up 25 plus points a game, deal with it?
I actually think that Grinch could be a better coach schematically if he wasn't coaching for Lincoln Riley. And I think that that's fundamentally the problem, right? The Grinch, look where Grinch has come from. He's come from Air Raid. He's come from Texas Tech. He's come from Washington State. And so he's sort of built a defense around undersized athletic linebackers, and he likes athleticism and quickness more than he does sort of brute force strength. But the problem with the Grinch defenses is that they wear down over the course of a game and over the course of a season because the other side of the ball is so dominant. They score so quickly that the defense is always on the field. That's the problem with the Alex Grinch defense, is that the small, shifty guys, or whether you've got sort of bigger guys where you need it, they all wear down because the offenses score so quickly. So the issue is not whether going from Oklahoma to USC or going from Texas Tech to USC is the change of scenery is going to make Grinch a better coach. What's going to make Grinch a better coach defensively, truthfully, is that he doesn't work for Lincoln Riley anymore. And that is going to be sort of the thing I think that a lot of Southern California fans are going to discover here in the next year or two when there is sort of an inevitable divorce between Grinch and USC. And I actually think under the right circumstances, Grinch could be a very good defensive coordinator if he's paired with the right head coach that is sort of complementary to what he's trying to do.
And the other piece of that is, and this falls more on, whoever is the secondary coach, which for USC is Dante Williams, is when you're coaching a defense that is usually, so let me say it this way, when the offense of your team is putting up a lot of points, that means obviously the other team is going to be throwing the ball an awful lot to play catch up. And so Oklahoma, I won't say historically, but under the Lincoln Riley era that I can remember, again, I'm not by any means an Oklahoma expert, but I can't think of many Oklahoma corners and safeties that have been elite talent that have gone to the NFL. I can think of a lot of good linebackers, a lot of good defensive linemen. So they've produced good on the front seven, but unfortunately, because of how their offense operates,
great point,
you need a better secondary in order to diffuse that. And so this will come down for USC, which right now that is their weakness, unfortunately, the secondary. They have a great pass rush. They have some good transfers in at linebacker. They got an Auburn transfer, an Alabama transfer at linebacker. The secondary is a weakness outside of Kalen Bullock, who's, the true sophomore who showed a lot of promise last year. And so it's going to be huge on Dante Williams, whether as a coach or as a recruiter, to build up that secondary because you're going to be seeing 50 passes a game. And that's the only way to counter it.
Oh, Ryan, that's exactly a great point. And what you're going to do is you're going to score a lot. You're going to try and get ahead in games. You're going to try and cut the D-line loose. You're going to be playing, knuckles on the ground, serious pass rush. But the offenses are expecting that, and they're going to run a bunch of misdirection. They're going to run a bunch of bubble screens. They're going to run a bunch of, actual traditional screens and expect the pass rush and just pick that secondary apart. And that's the problem. So you're actually using the front seven talent as a means of scoring more points against the secondary because the front seven talent is going to be there. So you're going to be running a bunch of these misdirections and quick hitter plays to get the ball out quickly and take the front seven completely out of the game. So unless and until SC gets elite talent at the secondary position, they could get all the front seven guys in the world, and they're still going to give up 30 plus because of the way the game is going to flow.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the thing. As a fan, you should be watching. We'll be obviously watching and covering is how the recruiting and transfer portal looks in that secondary, because that's gonna be the biggest thing. That's what they have to counter, and that's what's going to slow teams down. Is if they have a Derek Stingley in the back end, which Oklahoma never had. If they have a Derwin James on the back end, which Oklahoma never had. So we'll see if
the most important recruit, you could argue, after Caleb Williams, even more than Mario and even more than potentially, Addison off of the transfer, is Domani Jackson.
Mm-hmm. Huge. Domani Jackson could be that first Alex Grinch great secondary player that he never had. So maybe that's the missing link that we just solved, Jamal. And maybe that will change this SC defense, and we'll see for the better. But it's gonna be a lot of fun. So, all right, let's wrap this up. We got to bring this up, and we're not hating on PFF. I know we talked last episode about PFF's coaching rankings, but if they want to put out, and this wasn't an article, this was just an employee. I don't even know who it is. I don't have it on me. I feel bad, but I'm not trying to bash the person anyway, so I don't need to say a name. But essentially, a PFF employee tweeted out that the Vegas Raiders just signed. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. So Cooper Kupp's contract came out. Obviously, he's getting $75 million guaranteed over the next 3 seasons. Big extension, well worth it. We think. I think he's the best, if not the best receiver in all of football right now. But he basically said Vegas Raiders, because Hunter Renfrow just got a new contract as well, a 2-year deal for a fraction of the price. And he basically said the Vegas Raiders just got the same receiver as Cooper Kupp for a fraction of the price. So we got to at least talk about it. Cooper Kupp's our guy. This is the LA Football Podcast on the LA Football Network. I think that is the most egregious statement I've ever heard, but I'll throw it to you first, Jamal. I don't even know if you saw the tweet or just me bringing it up to you, but your thoughts on it.
Oh no, I saw the tweet, and it's so beyond ridiculous. I mean, the argument is, because they're built the same and they run similar, their tree route concepts are similar. That
not even built the same. They're white slot receivers, essentially. Let's call it what it is. They're white guys in the slot. That's the only similarity.
Ryan, you're allowed to say that. Okay, so there we go.
You're allowed to say it too.
But I mean, it's like saying, because certain guys play, a similar style that they're equivalent. I mean, call me when Hunter Renfrow wins the Triple Crown in receiving. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I mean, it's okay. Andrew Wiggins was compared to Kobe when he came out. I mean, because they were, similar size, and they kind of had similar mannerisms and played the game in a similar way in terms of moves. Is Andrew Wiggins Kobe Bryant? No, absolutely not. That's about how much credibility this argument has, and pick your sport in that regard. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I actually really like Hunter Renfrow. I think he's loved him at Clemson. It was a great pick by the Raiders. Obviously, don't like the Raiders, cover the Chargers here. But I think he's a very good player. He's a great route runner. I think he's underutilized in the Raiders system. I think he would definitely be used more. But Cooper Kupp is 4 inches taller. He's 25 pounds heavier. So he's not even the same size of player. Yes, they run a similar route tree, but even before Matthew Stafford got here, because people will say, oh, okay, well, look at how much of that attributed to Matthew. Even before he got here, every year of Kupp's career, he's put up more production than Hunter Renfrow so far. And I would think many people would say Derek Carr is a better quarterback than Jared Goff. Now, you could argue the Sean McVay system is much better than what John Gruden was running. If you want to, that's a different path we can take, and I think we would agree with that overall. But receiver is, and we've talked about this before, it's a very, very difficult position to compare. I know people love to do it, but it's so hard to quantify and compare, in my opinion, because it relies on so many factors. It's not like quarterback where you touch the ball in every play and you can really compare, arm angle, arm talent, obviously yards, touchdowns, all this, because the guy touches the ball every time. Receiver is so contingent, not only on their quarterback. I mean, let's be honest. we've brought this up before, but if you look at the top 25 quarterbacks of all time, 23 of them had Hall of Fame quarterbacks throwing the ball. It's very rare you find a top receiver who had a crummy quarterback. I think you could probably look at Randy Moss as maybe the only example when he had, and I wouldn't say crummy, but when he had Dante Culpepper and Randall Cunningham throughout most of his career, and obviously his best years, he had Tom Brady. But, Jerry Rice, Hall of Famers. Terrell Owens had some very good quarterbacks for his year. Had some not great ones either, but had some very good ones. We could go down the list, and that's, getting besides the point. You rely on that. You rely on scheme. You rely on, weather. If all of a sudden it's a bad weather game, you're going to be running the ball a lot more, and you're not going to be throwing it to you, and you might be doing more dump off passes. So it's very hard to quantify and compare receiver to receiver as much as people want to do. But Cooper Kupp won the Triple Crown and was the first player ever in one season to win the Triple Crown, the Offensive Player of the Year, and the Super Bowl MVP. Only one other player has done it, Jerry Rice, and he didn't do it in 1 year. He did it over the course of his career, and he's the greatest ever. So to say that a receiver who has the same skin tone but runs routes similar is essentially the same player, come on, guy. You're just going for retweets there now.
A much more profound answer than I did, especially when you talk about height weight characteristics. But I'll give you one on the transitive property. So who's the other receiver that Kupp is compared to in today's game as the argument over who's the best receiver in football? Like if Kupp isn't the best receiver in football, this is usually the name that people have as a counter, and it's Davante Adams. Davante Adams is now Hunter Renfrow's teammate with the Raiders. Davante Adams said something very interesting a couple of days ago about Mr. Carr, where he said, actually, in terms of catching balls from Carr and all the different things that I did, there's actually very little difference in terms of arm talent between Carr and Aaron Rodgers. Now, take that for what you will, but if Davante Adams believes that to be true, if the other alpha wide receiver in the NFL outside of Cooper Kupp believes that to be true, even by a fractional amount, then why weren't Hunter Renfrow's numbers anywhere close to Cooper Kupp's numbers?
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And,
so, either Davante Adams is egregiously lying. I don't necessarily think and pumping up his quarterback, or this take is just egregiously off, right? And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, where Adams is pumping up his quarterback for some confidence, and PFF through some advanced statistics and usage rates and what have you, there's maybe a little bit more of an iota of quantitative credibility. But the reality of the situation is that Renfrow is, you can compare sometimes, and Renfrow is not Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. I mean, his tweet did his job. Got a lot of talk, a lot of traction. I think that the company's doing, and again, this was just a tweet. It wasn't an article, so it wasn't like PFF has a stamped on it, but they're definitely, I don't know if they have like a stand-up meeting every Monday and say, all right, guys, let's do whatever we can to get as many retweets as possible. Let's be, like you said in the beginning, like not so out of the box wrong where we lose our credibility, but enough where people are going to just get fired up and talk about it on podcasts like we are right now. But yeah, I don't think
PFF for your, if not diabolical, but your mischievous plan, because it seems to be working quite well.
Yes, well done. So touche you. To the Davante Adams point, Tyreek Hill also came out and said that Tua Tagovailoa is more accurate than Patrick Mahomes. So it's the day of pumping up your new quarterback, yes, I guess. Which, hey, if you're a receiver, you have to do it or you don't get the ball. So that's the old, everyone wants to make a big point of it. That's the old thing in the book. You got to show love to your QB or you don't get the football. So you got to say, like, this guy's better than my wife. Like, I'd rather, stay the night with him than I care more about him than my best man at my wedding. Like, quarterbacks, you got to be your best friend no matter how bad they are. Otherwise, you're not getting the football. So, last question, this is not LA football related. Who has a better year this year, Tyreek Hill or Davante Adams, with their new respective teams and quarterbacks?
I think Hill. And I think that essentially what's happening is Miami is basically just creating offensively that Alabama team. and where Tua had a lot of success on a lot of read options. And they're going to kind of simplify the offense between Waddle and Hill, because everyone forgets that, Waddle and Devontae Smith and Henry Ruggs. I mean, Ruggs was essentially what Tyreek Hill is going to play in Miami. Ruggs played the Alabama spot.
Yep.
So they're actually kind of recreating schematically where Tua had his greatest success at the collegiate level. Obviously different games, obviously different talent levels, but I think there's a blueprint there to be very successful with Tua potentially. And I think Hill's going to have a really sizable year, as he has done in the past. It may not quite be the Kansas City numbers, but I think this expectation that he's just going to drop off a cliff, I don't see it, because I think there's a method to the madness. Devontae Adams, on the other hand, there's a big difference between Aaron Rodgers' arm talent and just about anybody else that's played the game in the history of football. So let alone, Carr. I think Adams' numbers are gonna go down significantly.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's an interesting point. They're kind of rebuilding Alabama. But the fun thing about Carr Adams, former college teammates, you got the rebuilding of Tua's collegiate, maybe not the same players necessarily, but obviously Waddle, but not Tyreek Hill didn't play with, but has the same style. And then in Vegas, you have the actual, like, they play together at Fresno State. So I thought there was another ranking that came out. It might have been PFF, shoot, for all I know. And it had when you looked at wide receiver rankings, they have like the Rams like 5th, which is crazy with Allen Robinson and Cooper Kupp. And I get Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but it's like, all right, Waddle had a very decent rookie year. Let's say, like, he had a good rookie year, but it was 1,000 yards. Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson are two like superstars. Like, really? You're not going to, and you have Matthew Stafford throwing the football, not Tua Tagovailoa. And I think the Chargers were even below them as well, with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, her two superstars, with arguably, in my opinion, soon to be the top quarterback in football with Justin Herbert. So they're definitely doing something just to get conversation, because there's no way they believe that unless they just live in Miami or something.
For sure. Absolutely. And they're doing a fantastic job, because we're talking about it, and so many others are as well. And so I think it's a great strategy, especially in the offseason, where there isn't, there's no games, there's nothing to sort of talk about on the field. These types of things, dominate the storyline. So I think they're doing a magnificent job. And I think in season, they're going to get back to kind of being who they are. But I think it's a very interesting offseason strategy.
Yeah. Touche. So had me finish the whole thing of whiskey about it, get fired up for no reason. But Jamal, this has been fun as always. Anything else you want to touch on before we sign off for the evening?
No, Ryan. I mean, the time goes quickly when we talk about our beloved LA teams. Always a pleasure, and can't wait for the next episode here.
Yeah, absolutely. So great conversation. We got some good college talk in there. For you Chargers fans out there listening, if you stuck around this long, we'll make sure to go Chargers heavy next episode. Mini camp this week, so there'll definitely be some things to talk about that there wasn't, because they have mini camp a week later than the Rams or whatnot. So we'll definitely touch on kind of how the Chargers look, and maybe we'll get like Danny Dub on or something to join us just to give us some Chargers insight. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. Jamal, my man, this has been great as always. Appreciate you.
Always a pleasure, bud.
Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to follow Jamal on Twitter at LAFB Jams. You can find myself at Ryan Dyrud, LAFB, the main account at LAFB Network. Make sure to like and subscribe to the show wherever you listen. We are everywhere you get your podcast, and on YouTube at LAFB Network, and the website, as always, which is where you should go to get everything. LAFBnetwork.com. Got all our merchandise there. We got some fun new stuff in the locker room that you should make sure to check out. We got some giveaways coming up. They'll be announced. Make sure to be following our Twitter handle and our Instagram handle to get updates on that. But for Jamal Madney, I'm Ryan Dyrud. This is the LA Football Podcast. We'll see y'all in a couple days.